This is India's #1 news network, and you're watching News9. English news as it should be.
A very good morning. You're watching News9. I'm Karthik Malhotra, and well, it's been an exciting weekend, of course, beginning with the US strikes on the Houthis in Yemen, followed announcing today is the India-New Zealand free trade agreement talks after almost an entire decade. We'll discuss that and more on the show. But also on the show today, we will try and decode what does the new ruling by the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal, the IT-80, mean for NRIs and their tax status and tax residency in India. Karanjot Singh will be joining us on the show to discuss that, and also on the show, a mood of the markets. What are the triggers that could influence the Indian stock markets on this trading week beginning today, Monday? You're watching Morning Brief at 9. This is Morning Brief at 9. First up, let's look at the headlines making news this Monday morning. Green card holders, especially the elderly, including Indian origin senior citizens, face secondary inspection at US Customs and Border Protection. Some green card holders also detained overnight. Prime Minister Modi talks of natural synergy between US President Donald Trump and himself. Says Bharat First aligns with Trump's America First on Lex Fridman's podcast. Commerce Ministry and Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal tells industry to replace Chinese goods with imports from the US as per an Indian Express report. Remarks amid reciprocal tariffs to kick in from April 2nd. India and New Zealand announced resumption of the free trade agreement after 10 long years, with New Zealand Prime Minister Christopher Luxon here in India. Meanwhile, Apple is all set to begin the AirPods production at Foxconn's Hyderabad facility starting as early as April. First batch of AirPods only for the export market. And only days spent in India to decide tax status of non-resident Indians, says Income Tax Appellate Tribunal. We discuss what this means for NRIs. Gold has breached the $3,000 mark, nears 90,000 per 10 grams for 24-carat gold in Delhi. And with gold at record highs, sovereign gold bonds to cost India dearly. First batch of redemption begins. Meanwhile, crude prices rise 1% on US saying its attack on Houthis will sustain. Will this have a bearing on the Indian stock markets? We'll figure out when the markets open at 9:15 a.m. A German national with a valid US green card has been detained by immigration officers at Logan Airport, Massachusetts, sparking outrage and raising concerns over immigration policies in the US. Now, 34-year-old Fabian Schmidt was returning from a trip to Luxembourg on March 7th when he was taken into custody. According to his family, Schmidt, who has lived in the US since his teens and resides in New Hampshire, was arrested, stripped naked and subjected to what they describe as violent interrogation before being moved to a detention facility in Rhode Island. His mother says Schmidt's green card was recently renewed and he has no legal issue. Yet his travel document was flagged upon arrival. His partner, who was waiting to pick him up, spent hours searching for answers before realizing he had been detained. Officials have not provided specific details, citing privacy regulations, but US Customs and Border Protection said that individuals who violate visa terms or statutes may be detained and even removed. Now, Schmidt's case is the latest in a series of incidents where lawful US residents have been detained at US airports. This case was one of many in the recent past where there's growing concern over the treatment of green card holders at US airports. Indian green card holders in the US are also facing increased scrutiny at airports, with reports of overnight detention and pressure to surrender their residency status. Immigration attorneys say elderly Indians, especially those who spend winter months in India, are being questioned extensively upon their return. Under US immigration laws, green card holders who stay outside the country for more than 180 days are treated as seeking readmission. Those absent for over a year risk being considered as having abandoned their US residency. However, legal experts warn that individuals should not be forced to give up their green cards unless a judge rules. Many elderly Indian residents have been asked to sign Form I-407, effectively surrendering their status. Now, lawyers are advising that individuals should not sign under pressure, as doing so waives their right to appeal. The issue has raised concerns within the Indian diaspora as families fear losing their legal status due to prolonged visits to India. And moving on, in a candid one-on-one podcast with renowned American podcaster and AI expert Lex Fridman, Prime Minister Modi emphasized India's crucial role in the development of artificial intelligence, stating that AI cannot progress without India's involvement. He highlighted the country's vast talent pool and rapid tech advancements, highlighting how India is actively shaping the future of AI. Listen in.
एक बात आप शायद ज्यादा लगेगी और हो सकता है किसी को बुरा भी लगे, लेकिन जब आपने पूछा है तो अभी मेरे मन में से निकल रहा है, मैं कहना चाहता हूं। दुनिया एआई के लिए कुछ भी कर ले, भारत के बिना एआई अधूरा है। बहुत जिम्मेवार स्टेटमेंट में कर रहा हूं। मुझे लगता है देखिए, एआई डेवलपमेंट एक कोलैबोरेशन है। यहां हर कोई एक दूसरे को अपने एक्सपीरियंस और लर्निंग से सपोर्ट कर सकता है, और इंडिया सिर्फ इसका मॉडल नहीं बना रहा, बल्कि स्पेसिफिक यूज केसेस से के हिसाब से एआई बेस्ड एप्लीकेशंस को भी डेवलप कर रहा है।
Prime Minister Modi also praised US President Donald Trump for his thoughtful gesture during the Howdy Modi event, where he attentively listened to the entire speech and, despite security protocols, joined him in taking a lap around the stadium to greet the audience. Listen in.
मेरे लिए टच कर गया कि इस व्यक्ति में हिम्मत है, ये डिसीजन खुद लेते हैं, और दूसरा, मोदी पर उनको भरोसा है कि मोदी ले जा रहा है तो चलिए चलते हैं। तो ये आपसी विश्वास का भाव, ये इतना हमारा मजबूती मैंने उसी दिन देखा, और मैंने राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप को उस दिन जिस रूप में महसूस किया कि सिक्योरिटी वालों को पूछे बिना मेरे साथ चल देना हजारों लोगों के बीच में, अब उसका वीडियो देखोगे तो आपको आश्चर्य होगा। और जब उन पर गोली चली अब इस चुनाव कैंपेन में, तो मुझे राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप एक ही नजर आए। उस स्टेडियम में मेरा हाथ पकड़ करके चलने वाले ट्रंप, और गोली लगने के बाद भी अमेरिका के लिए जीना, अमेरिका के लिए ही जिंदगी, ये जो उनका रिफ्लेक्शन था, क्योंकि मैं नेशन फर्स्ट वाला हूं, वे अमेरिका फर्स्ट वाले हैं, मैं भारत फर्स्ट वाला हूं, तो हमारी जोड़ी बराबर जम जाती है।
Prime Minister Modi there talking about the natural synergy between Donald Trump and himself, saying Bharat First is not unlike Donald Trump's America First strategy. Moreover, Prime Minister Modi also talked about the long history of India-China relations and the importance of mutual understanding. Listen in.
जहां तक डिफरेंसेस तो होते हैं, दो पड़ोसी देश होते हैं तो कुछ ना कुछ तो होता है। ऑकेजनल डिसएग्रीमेंट भी बहुत स्वाभाविक है, कोई ऐसा तो हर चीज नहीं होता, एक परिवार में भी रहता है। लेकिन हमारी कोशिश है कि हमारे जो डिफरेंसेस हैं डिस्प्यूट में ना बदले, उस दिशा में हमारा प्रयास रहता है। उसी प्रकार से हम डिस्कॉर्ड नहीं, डायलॉग, इसी पर बात कर बल देते हैं, तभी जाकर के एक स्टेबल, कोऑपरेटिव रिलेशनशिप, और दोनों ही देशों के लिए बेस्ट इंटरेस्ट में है। हमारा साथ होना ना सिर्फ बेनिफिशियल है बल्कि ग्लोबल स्टेबिलिटी और प्रॉस्पेरिटी के लिए भी जरूरी है। और जब 21वीं सदी एशिया की सदी है तो हम तो चाहेंगे कि भारत चीन के बीच में स्पर्धा सब स्वाभाविक है, स्पर्धा कोई गलत चीज नहीं है, ये संघर्ष नहीं होना चाहिए।
All right, Prime Minister Modi there talking about India-China relationship. Well, after a gap of nearly 10 years, India and New Zealand yesterday announced the resumption of negotiations for a proposed free trade agreement to boost economic ties. Shortly after landing at New Delhi, New Zealand Prime Minister Christopher Luxon described India as a country of huge importance for the nation's prosperity and security, even as the two sides announced launching negotiations for a comprehensive free trade pact. Now, Luxon will hold wide-ranging talks with Prime Minister Narendra Modi today and will also deliver a lecture at the inaugural session of the Resumption chief guest. India and New Zealand began negotiating the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement in April 2010 to boost trade in goods, services and investment. However, after 10 rounds of discussions, the talks stalled in February of 2015. The two nations announced the launch of negotiations for a comprehensive and mutually beneficial India-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement negotiations, and this according to the Commerce Ministry. The announcement was made after the meeting of Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal and Todd McClay, New Zealand's Minister for Trade and Investment. Prime Minister of New Zealand Christopher Luxon is here on a 4-day visit from March 16th. Now, with bilateral trade growing and continuing to grow steadily, surpassing $1 billion during April to Jan of 2025, the FTA negotiations aim to unlock new avenues for businesses and consumers, fostering mutual growth and prosperity of the two nations. New Zealand's average import tariff is only 2.3%, with over half of its tariff lines already duty-free, meaning Indian goods already have a substantial access to the New Zealand market. But in contrast, India's average tariff stands at 17.8%, meaning it would have to make significant reductions, making a traditional FTA less attractive for India. Now, as talks resume, both countries will need to find common ground on these issues to move forward successfully. And this is as per Ajay Srivastav, the founder of GTRI. Now, New Zealand is reportedly demanding greater access to India's dairy market. And apart from that, there are, of course, other important areas where trade between New Zealand and India also continue. And this includes India's exports include auto, include machinery, farm equipment, among others, whereas India's imports from New Zealand are significantly higher in terms of the kiwi fruit, meat products, apples, timber good, and many other such materials. On the services front, India's service exports to New Zealand stood at 214.1 million, while New Zealand's service exports to India totaled a much higher $456.5 million. Now, moving on to another story that we are tracking this morning, and this comes by way of a new income tax appellate tribunal, and that ruling now gives clarity on only the number of days NRIs spend in India to be relevant in assessing the tax status of NRIs. Will they or won't they be tax residents? Now, joining us to discuss this very important story this morning is Mr. Karanjot Singh, his partner Lakshmi Kumaran and Sudhakaran. Mr. Karanjot Singh, thank you so much. Good morning and thanks for being here with us. Help us understand what is this new IT-AT ruling and what does it mean for NRIs?
Hi, good morning, Karthik, and good morning to all the viewers. So, Karthik, before we discuss the actual judgment, I just wanted to take some time to reflect on the legal provisions that have been discussed by the Mumbai bench of IT-AT in their order determining the residency of an individual who had left India to exercise employment in USA. Now, in India, the taxation of an individual is dependent on their residency in India. This is important because a person who is a non-resident is assessed only in respect of their Indian sourced income as compared to a resident who is taxed on their global income. So therefore, classification into a resident or non-resident essentially can significantly alter your tax liabilities in India and can also bring in your foreign sourced incomes to tax in India if you're determined to be a resident. Now, typically, the residential status is determined on the basis of the stay of the individual in India. So if an individual is residing in India in 182 days in a given financial year, the individual is assessed as a tax resident of India, or in the alternate, if an individual is in India for 365 days in 4 years prior to the tax year and for 60 days in a tax year, they are still assessed as a tax resident of India. So in either of the conditions, the individual could be assessed as an Indian resident. Now, so, in a case of an individual,
if I can just cut you in here, Karanjot, so help us. Saying 182 days in a year is not sufficient. Even if an Indian spends 60 days in India in a tax year, then his overseas income is subject to taxation in India. Is that what you're saying?
So if the individual is in India for 60 days in a given financial year and 365 days in 4 years prior to that, even then the individual could be assessed in India despite the fact that he's not spent 182 days in a given financial year. Now,
what is this 182-day new ruling which has come in? Now, what does this 182-day mean if you're saying that 60 days also makes you liable to pay taxes in India?
Right. So, an individual who is a citizen of India,
okay,
who is actually leaving India for the purpose of exercising employment outside India, there the condition of 60 and 365 days, etc., that practically does not apply. So, the moot point in this judgment is as to whether the individual who had left India but had spent a short duration in search of employment, whether the period that was spent in search of the employment could be counted for the purpose of determining the residency or not. So the peculiar facts that were before the ITAT were, so here one Mr. Gulati, he was in India for a period of about 156 days during the financial year 15-16, and he was in USA for 210 days in the given financial year. Now, out of the 210 days, for 28 days, he was actually searching for employment in USA. And for the remaining period of 182 days, he was actually exercising employment there, and he was actually receiving salary remunerations there.
Okay.
Now, it was the tax officer's contention that the law provides exception only for the days when you're actually exercising employment outside India. So therefore, according to the tax officer, while the 182 days where the individual was actually exercising employment could be counted as days outside India, the 28 days where no such employment was exercised could not be excluded for the purpose of determination of Indian residency. In other words, the tax officer added the 28 days to the 156 days where the individual was actually present in India and determined the period of presence in India to be 184 days.
All right.
Now, because the individual had gone to exercise employment outside India, that the officer was not disputing. As per officer also, the period of determination of residency was only 182 days, but by adding 28 days on top of it, the individual was becoming a tax resident of India.
All right. So, Karanjot, if I can just draw in some more clarity here for the sake of our viewers, especially those who are NRIs and watching us from outside of India. If there is somebody of Indian origin, a citizen of India who is working outside of India and spends less than 182 days on Indian soil, then there is no need for him or her to pay taxes in India. Am I right?
Yes, Karthik. I would just want to add to that. So here we were dealing with assessment year 16-17. Pursuant to that, in 2021, the law has slightly been amended.
All right.
So in cases of NRIs who are visiting India, coming back to India, there in certain cases they could be treated as resident but not ordinarily resident if they spent more than 120 days in India
Right.
provided they have Indian sourced incomes exceeding 15 lakhs. So that's an amendment that was made in 21, but
Right.
by and large, what you said still holds.
All right. And just one more point of clarity for those who are spending, let's say, more than 182 days in India, they are liable to pay taxes on India. What would be their tax slab on the income that they are earning overseas? Is that going to be the Indian tax slabs, the Indian tax law which will kick in, or are they going to pay taxes which are in sync with the tax laws of the country where they are earning that overseas income? Or is it going to be a case of double taxation? They pay taxes in the home country and back here in India as well.
Okay. So, Karthik, in cases of individuals who are actually dual residents, that is to say, they become residents of one of the countries by applying the test of that particular country as also residents of India, the treaty protection comes in, and there is a tiebreaker test in the treaties to determine where the individual is resident. Assumingly, even if as per the treaty, the individual is a resident of India, the Indian slab rates apply to the global income. In other words, the entire total income, be it Indian sourced income or the foreign sourced incomes, they are subject to tax in India as per Indian slab rates.
All right. Got it. Well, let's leave it at that. Karanjot Singh, partner, Lakshmi Kumaran and Sridharan, thank you so much for joining us this morning and helping us try and understand this fairly complex tax story here. But we will keep coming back to you as and when there is such a story. Well, time for a short break. But coming up on the other side, we will bring you a check on the Indian markets as they seem to open in the green this morning. Nishal Maheshwari, market expert, will be here to help us understand what are the factors which are driving the market sentiment this morning. You're watching Morning Brief at 9.
You work too hard. Work smart like me.
Why? Won a lottery, is it?
You can say so. I'm investing in a great scheme in the share market. High returns guaranteed.
Your high returns aren't Karan Arjun for them to definitely come to you.
Meaning?
Dad, there's risk involved in the share market. Nobody can promise guaranteed high returns. It's illegal to do so.
Really?
Yeah.
सोच कर, समझ कर, invest कर. I know that you and I, we are dreamers.
For an India that's chasing its dreams, this is the drive of your dreams. Introducing the all-new Skoda Kailak. Own your dream.
Skoda.
What is to the nines? In literal terms, it's perfection. But to us, it's not just a phrase, it's an attitude. One that starts at your desk and sends a statement to the world. To the nines is about taking charge. It's a way of life where every seam, every fold, is crafted with excellence. It's timeless elegance and uncompromising quality made for the corner office. It's the ideas that inspire redefining order and elevating the tabletop. To the nines, for the leaders of today and the visionaries of tomorrow.
Every brand tells a story. And they are the storytellers. The Sutradhars. They present a brand with band, baja and barat to you. They are the Brandwalas.
Welcome back. You're watching Morning Brief at 9. The market seemed to have a head start this morning with the Sensex up almost half a percentage point. Nifty up about 0.4%. This is the mood of the market at 9:20 a.m. Remember, just 5 minutes into the opening of the markets on the Loud Street this morning. Nifty 50 holding almost close to the 22,500 mark this morning. Sensex happily above the 74,000 mark this morning. Let's look at the Nifty 50 heat map and make sense of some of the sectors and stocks which are in action today. Well, it's mostly a green pack this morning, barring the IT space. Infosys is down about 0.5 percentage point this morning, but otherwise the banking sector doing well. Energy stocks doing well this morning. Reliance, ONGC and Coal India. In fact, ONGC up 1.37% in trade right now. Coal India up about 1.3%. This perhaps comes on the back of almost a 1% rise in crude oil prices. This came over the weekend as US continued its strikes on Yemen Houthis. Now, in addition to that, there also seems to be some positive traction for the auto sector stocks. Maruti Suzuki is up about 1%. Tata Motors is up about 1.3%. M&M, which has been losing ground over the last few weeks, is also up about 1.53% or so. Well, this is the mood of the market as they have just opened. Joining me this morning is Nishal Maheshwari. Nishal, good morning. Thank you so much for being here with us on News9. Help us decode what is driving the market mood this morning.
Hi, morning. Morning to all your viewers. I think it is just the handover of the US. Friday, US was pretty good. Both the Nasdaq and Dow was pretty good. So we were closed on Friday. So both Thursday and Friday, the US markets have been good. And I think the handover here has been there. So that's why we are seeing basically some amount of positive opening. Let's see how long it sustains.
Okay, you seem to be a little skeptical about it sustaining these levels. What could come into play, Mr. Maheshwari? Could it be perhaps the sustained attacks by US on the Yemen Houthis, oil price rising? Are these likely to impact the Indian markets and the mood of the market this morning?
I don't think so. The oil pricing is going anywhere, basically. These are only temporary disruptions. I'm more worried about what is happening in the US. And there I continue to believe basically that every evening find new pronouncements. And that is what causes the disruption in the market. Okay. So yes, I think this looks like more of a short-term bounce rather than actually a sustained buying in the market.
Okay. Mr. Maheshwari, if I can draw you into this conversation that was really raging in social media where another market expert perhaps SIPs and market investments are not the best suited for retail investors and gold and real estate is where money should be parked. Which side of the pendulum are you on, sir? Do you think there is any merit in such arguments, or do you think the Indian investor is better off continuing with the SIP story?
So I'm a whole life basically has been on the equity side. I do not understand much of the other assets. So I would be biased in my opinion. But if you look back into history of the equity markets, I think for last 30, 35, 40 years, Indian markets have delivered around 13.5% kind of a CAGR return. So that's pretty commendable. So I would think basically this is a good time. Continue with your SIPs. No need to panic. Yes, there would be corrections, and I don't see, at least for the next 2 quarters, market finding its footing. But then you have to look at for the longer term if you want to invest in equities.
Okay. And within the equity basket, Mr. Maheshwari, now there have been, of course, this bloodbath that we've seen more so in the small cap and the mid cap index. And many experts out there are also exercising caution and telling retail investors that that should be one territory that you should steer clear of. Do you agree? Do you think there is a lot more risk and perhaps not as much potential reward in being with the small cap and mid cap space? And at this moment, should investors just look at either thematic stocks, which is what the AMFI data suggests, or should they look at large cap mutual funds?
So I'm saying this is a return basically of a Nifty for the last 30, 35 years. So I think even in the small caps and mid caps, I think similar kind of returns have been there, maybe slightly higher than the broader Nifty.
Right.
So what I believe is basically, yes, in the next 1 or 2 quarters, because there has been a huge amount of froth, especially on the mid cap and small cap, they might correct. But I think there is no fear basically saying that they are going to blow up or something like that. So I continue to believe there is no fear on the mid cap, small cap. Yes, in the short term, you might see higher returns in the large caps.
And so, of course, you started off by mentioning that every evening there is a new surprise that comes from the US. Have the markets not priced in all potential surprise elements from Donald Trump, whether it is tariffs, whether it is immigration, or any such? Do you think the markets are still likely to react to whatever Donald Trump announces, or is all of that already factored in, priced in?
So, as you have said, it's every day evening. So how will anybody price in that thing basically? Because there is a new pronouncement every day and it gets taken back also.
Right.
So really the market doesn't know basically what's really going to happen. I think April 2nd is one where he has said that from April 2nd he'll put reciprocal tariffs across the world. So we should wait. I think a major event will pass through, and I'm not sure basically whether it will happen or not. But that is one date I'm watching for, saying that possibly some amount of semblance in the market will come back.
Okay.
So that's, I think, is a good date to put in your calendar.
All right. So April 2nd, of course, is a good day to pull in the calendar, but also April 1st, which is when the new financial year kicks in. Now, data that we've seen come out on domestic fronts right now, and even internationally for that, Master Maheshwari, we have inflation, which is now finally below RBI's threshold of 4%. We also have good numbers coming on IIP. Manufacturing is registering about 5.5% growth. Now, from April 1st, you will have the new financial year and hence the new tax regime kicking in, arguably giving Indians more money in their hands, which could sort of, kickstart this whole consumption cycle once again. So on the domestic front, what do you make of the coming financial year and all the triggers that we are seeing coming in? Do you think the worst in the markets is presumably over and there is only better news which should start to start climbing up come 1st April?
So I think the worst can only be determined when you look at the hindsight, whether that was the worst or not. So I wouldn't want to hazard a guess, basically saying that the worst is over. Yes, a lot of this pain has been priced in. If you really look at it in the last 1 quarter, I think both the government as well as the RBI, so both monetary as well as fiscal side, basically they are very aggressively. You have seen rate cuts happening. You've seen RBI coming in and pumping in liquidity into the system. Government on its part basically has given a tax cut. So I think a lot of these things have started moving. Now it will all show up in a couple of quarters because that's the time basically it takes to transmit and show up in numbers.
Okay.
So wait up for a couple of quarters, but things are getting better, but it will show up in numbers in a couple of quarters.
Okay, so stay put for a couple of quarters and that is when the data will start reflecting in markets. But what about similar factors globally? So inflation in the US also finally getting hemmed in. If I remember, 2.8% is the inflation against 2.9% previously reported. So 2.8%, more chances or more headroom available for the Fed Reserve also to cut interest rates. Likewise, Indian inflation ebbing. So April 8th and 9th is when we could see a rate cut announcement by Indian industry, by the Indian Central Bank as well. Overall, for the industry, that means cost of capital goes down. The cycle of capex investments, the cycle of job creation, do you think 2025, April 1st onwards is finally when it is likely to kick in, at least looking at the data that we have available at hand right now?
Yes, I think inflation is down definitely for India. I'm not sure about the US. I'm no expert on the US. But with these tariffs coming in, basically somewhere the pricing has to be priced in the higher tariffs. So definitely, I think USA is going to see a higher inflation as we go ahead. So not sure whether Fed is going to cut interest rates now. I think what the market is penciling in there is in early July when another rate cut is going to happen. So I think the total rate cuts which they are talking about in the US is one that's happened. Another two are expected in the current calendar year. For Indian market, I definitely expect another rate cut happening in April. So that will set the tone for at least a recovery happening in 2026.
recovery in 2026 with the RBI likely to cut rates in April. All right, Mr. Maheshwari, I can't let you go without discussing gold because gold has also now crossed that historic milestone of $3,000 per ounce. Now, at this stage, even in India, gold in Delhi, for example, is trading above 89,000 rupees per 10 grams. So if you were to do this sort of trade-off between equity investments or parking some money in gold, what should be the ideal asset allocation and what should that pie look like for the average retail investor in India?
So gold to me at these prices is what stock market was, I think 5-6 months back, basically. Huge amount of froth. Yes, it's a risk of market across the world given what's happening in the US. And that's why you're seeing basically the world traders piling into the gold side. But as a long-term investor, I would want to avoid gold at 91,000 and maybe look at equities basically because equities is already corrected. I think in maybe some time as the inflation interest rates ease off and there is more semblance in the market, basically you'll start seeing gold coming off. So I think at these prices, it's an avoid.
Avoid buying gold, but for those who are already holding gold, do you suggest they hold on to it or is this the time to actually sell and make a killing on their investments?
So, as you know, most of the Indians basically never sell gold. I don't expect them because this is not an investment, I believe. Most of them basically buy it as an ornament and then it's for keeps. So yes, if you have gold as an investment, I think there is a good time to take profits.
Okay. And those who have invested in digital gold, especially the sovereign gold bonds, and that has also been under the scanner now, apparently, you know, voices from many quarters coming, Mr. Maheshwari, and talking about how the government made this grave mistake of starting a scheme like the sovereign gold bonds, and perhaps it doesn't have enough gold hedged against those who opted for this scheme. Now, what happens to, to government's own gold reserves and as redemptions begin on sovereign gold bonds? Do you think the government has actually made a mistake by starting a scheme of that nature? And for those who are already invested in the sovereign gold bond scheme, is there any risk to their investments, to your mind?
No, not at all, basically. I think sovereign by itself means basically that India is backing it up.
Yeah.
So there's no question of any risk there. And as far as the government is concerned, basically, I think it's a very thought through scheme. I do not see any reason for being afraid about it. So your investments are very secure.
All right. Well, let's leave it at that, Mr. Maheshwari. Thank you so much for taking time out this Monday morning. Of course, it's just the start of the trading day in the start of the trading week. Well, markets are looking positive this morning. Let's see if the momentum sustains, but we will leave it at that. But moving on now, we were talking about gold. Well, gold, as I told you, has shattered a historic crossing the $3,000 per ounce mark for the first time on Friday. The surge comes amid growing trade tensions and expectations of US interest rate cuts, driving investors toward the precious metal as a safe haven asset. Now remember, gold has been long considered a hedge against inflation and economic uncertainty. Now, according to analysts, the rally is boosted by geopolitical risks and central bank buying. With economic concerns mounting, the question now is, how high can gold really go?
Gold broke through the $3,000 an ounce milestone for the first time on Friday. It built on a historic rally as trade tensions and US rate cut bets supercharge its appeal as a safe story of value. Gold is traditionally viewed as a safe haven investment during times of inflation or economic volatility. Janet Moy is head of market analysis at RBC Brewin Dolphin.
Gold is really regarded as a hedge as stagflation. It works well in an inflationary environment, low growth environment, and also, of course, these geopolitical tensions that is happening at the moment. So I do think investors probably would favor gold going forward, given this uncertain outlook.
Gold has risen 14% so far this year. The surge has been driven by concerns over the impact of US President Donald Trump's tariffs and a recent market sell-off in stock markets. A global trade war has hurt financial markets and raised recession fears. On Thursday, Trump threatened to put a 200% tariff on alcohol imports from Europe. One leading analyst said investors were searching for stability and finding it in gold. Bets on monetary policy easing by the US Federal Reserve have also helped its performance this year. The Fed is widely expected to keep its benchmark overnight interest rate unchanged at its meeting on Wednesday.
All right, well, that Wednesday meeting is what all eyes are on. But before we head into a break, a look at global headlines in news this morning. Trump administration considers new travel ban targeting 41 countries with full visa suspensions for some and partial restrictions for others. Consumer confidence in the US takes a sharp hit. The University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index plunges to 57.9 in March, down from 64.7 in February. Markets brace for major central bank decisions as investors watch Fed rates, Trump's trade policies, and global economic changes. US stocks rebound as investors grab bargains, but trade war fears persist with S&P and Nasdaq extending weekly losing streaks. US bourbon distillers brace for impact as trade war escalates, with Canada and EU targeting American whiskey in retaliation to tariffs. Trump's threat of 200% tariff on European wine sparks industry fears as US-EU trade war escalates, leaving winemakers and importers bracing for losses. And China's Baidu has finally unveiled not one but two advanced AI models, claiming its Ernie X1 rivals DeepSeek R1 at half the cost as competition intensifies in China's AI race. BMW warns of over $1 billion earnings hit as EU and US tariffs threaten exports, escalating trade tensions with China, Europe, and the US. And finally, SpaceX crew 10 capsule docks at ISS, paving way for stranded NASA astronaut Bush Wilmore and Sunita Williams to return home after 9 long months. All these stories and more on the other side. You're watching Morning Brief at 9.
What does it take to be the greatest in the world? There is one thing which truly sets you apart. Your inner strength. Sodium DMT Reebok, true inner strength.
We don't need double-digit growth to get to high-income country status.
Our Indian economy being the 5th largest in the world or 3rd largest in the world in few years.
Today at 4 trillion out of about 105, 108 trillion dollar world economy, are hardly 4%. But when we get to 10, for example, we will be at least 7-8% of the world economy, and that's when the time when our $1 trillion exports will maybe become $2.5 trillion. To be Viksit, we need to do all kinds of other things, but high income is what I look at.
It's not a matter of great achievement, because India can be the 1st largest economy of the world with per capita income still being less than the global average.
We can be in 2050 with average 6% growth from 2022 for 30 years. 6%, not 7%, not 8%, not 9%, not 10%.
The time has come where we build our unorganized sector, that'll build our organized sector and make us more competitive.
मेरा ये विश्वास कहता है, भारत की युवा शक्ति का सामर्थ्य भारत को जल्द से जल्द विकसित राष्ट्र बनाएगा।
This and more streaming on News9 Plus. Download now.
Light, camera, and action. Kick back, relax, grab your favorite snack because News9 is here with your weekend dose of entertainment. It's time to take a deeper dive into the buzzworthy happenings of the entertainment world. From celebrity gossips to exclusive conversations, from nostalgic moments to News9's Pick of the Week. Don't worry, we've got you covered here. And I hope you've grabbed your popcorn by now because News9's Page 3 is here to serve you everything that we call entertainment. So do stay tuned every Saturday and Sunday, 2:30 p.m.
Welcome back. Let's look at global news this Monday morning. The Trump administration is considering a new travel ban, one that could bar citizens from dozens of countries, according to some sources. Now, if implemented, it would be one of the broadest restrictions yet, echoing the controversial 2017 ban that sparked mass protests. So which countries could face a full visa suspension this time? This report breaks it down for you.
Widespread demonstrations erupted when President Donald Trump, in his first term, issued a travel ban for 7 majority Muslim countries. And now, the Trump administration is considering a new travel ban. That's according to sources familiar with the matter and an internal memo seen by Reuters, which shows 41 countries divided into 3 separate groups. The first group of 10 countries, including citizens from Afghanistan, Iran, Syria, Cuba, and North Korea, would be set for a full visa suspension. The second group of 5 countries, Eritrea, Haiti, Laos, Myanmar, and South Sudan, would face partial visa suspensions. The third group, which includes Belarus and Pakistan, would be considered for a partial visa suspension too, if, according to the memo, their governments, quote, do not make efforts to address deficiencies within 60 days. A U.S. official told Reuters there could be changes on the list and that it was yet to be approved by the administration. When Trump took office on January 20th, he issued an executive order requiring intensified security vetting of any foreigners seeking U.S. entry. That order directed several cabinet members to submit by March 21st a list of countries from which travel should be partly or fully suspended. The State Department did not immediately respond to a request for comment from Reuters.
Meanwhile, consumer confidence in the U.S. has taken a sharp hit. The University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index plunged to 57.9 in March, down from 64.7 in the month of February, well below economists' expectations. And it's not just sentiment that's shifting. Consumer inflation expectations are also on the rise. So what's driving this drop? This report tells you all about it.
U.S. consumer sentiment plunged sharply in March amid worries that President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs would ignite inflation and undercut the economy. The University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index dropped to 57.9 this month, more than 5 points below what economists polled by Reuters had expected. The sentiment index has now erased all gains made since Trump's election victory in November. Meanwhile, consumers' inflation expectations have spiked. Their one-year outlook for inflation jumped to 4.9%. And over the next 5 years, consumers saw inflation running at 3.9%, much higher than last month's estimate of 3.5%. Trump has slapped a raft of tariffs on a wide range of goods from key trade partners like Canada, China, and the European Union, who have responded with duties of their own. The trade war has rattled financial markets, sparking a stock market sell-off, which also contributed to depressing sentiment this month.
Well, from how markets are reacting to U.S. President Donald Trump's policies to a wave of central bank decisions, all eyes on the Fed this week. The big question is, will more rate cuts be expected? Policymakers are steady on Wednesday, but investors will be looking for any hints about what's next. Here's a look at all the top stories in business and finance coming up this week.
From reactions to Trump's policies to a frenzy of central bank decisions, these are the stories to watch in business and finance in the coming week. President Donald Trump's ditching of decades of U.S. foreign policy positions has shocked allies and left markets reeling. A U.S. tariff policy targeting friends and foes alike could leave a lasting impact on trade. And JP Morgan's chief economist warned the US's standing as an investment destination could be at risk if Trump undermines trust in governance. Eyes will be on how the upheaval hits Wall Street. The upcoming Fed meeting will be all about whether more rate cuts are on the horizon. Policymakers are expected to hold rates steady on Wednesday. Fed fund futures indicate a cut could come in June, with nearly 3 baked in through 2025. The case for easing got a little stronger thanks to the latest tame consumer price index report, though the Fed is also juggling the potential impact on inflation from new import tariffs. England, Switzerland, and Sweden's central banks are all up. Markets expect the Riksbank to hold rates steady on Thursday, likely marking the end of the easing cycle in Sweden. The BOE is set to hold as well, but it's probably a breather before more easing later in the year. It's a different story in dovish Switzerland, with the SNB expected to cut its benchmark rate to just 0.25%. Conditions are falling into place for the Bank of Japan to raise interest rates again, just maybe not quite yet. BOJ Governor Kazuo Ueda in recent comments predicted a steady rise in wages will transform into increased consumer spending. Sources say a hike could be under serious discussion as soon as the April-May gathering, though the majority of economists see July as most likely.
And as a cocktail of tariff-induced trade war heats up between the US, Canada and the European Union, bourbon distillers are feeling heady. US whiskey makers could soon take a major hit as the European Union proposed a 50% tariff on American whiskey, which was a direct response to President Donald Trump's 25% tariff on steel and aluminum imports. Take a look.
With American whiskey now a tariff target, many U.S. bourbon distilleries are left wondering if they can afford to expand internationally.
The whole Canadian growth strategy is now on pause.
Victor Yarbrough is the co-founder of Bro Brothers Distillery, Kentucky's first black-owned distillery. It operates in Louisville, known to many as Bourbon City or the Wall Street of whiskey. But now, plans for an expansion beyond Bourbon City into Canada have been put on hold. That's because many liquor stores and bars in Canada have pulled American whiskey off the shelves entirely in support of their country amid President Donald Trump's ongoing threat of tariffs.
Part of the expansion is being able to go into the Canadian market, which is a huge market. You know, there are neighbors, there are brothers, and this is something that we've kind of been working on behind the scenes, and all of a sudden, this hard work that we've had is now being impacted.
And U.S. distilleries are reeling after the European Union proposed a 50% tariff on American whiskey in retaliation of Trump's 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum imports.
With the tariffs...
For Judy Hollis-Jones, co-founder of Louisville's Buzzard's Roost Whiskey, introducing their product to Europe doesn't make practical sense.
We were looking at next year growing in Europe. You know, having lived in England, I understand they love Scotch. They're beginning to talk about their own English whiskey. So with these tariffs, I don't think they're going to be interested in bourbon.
U.S. distillery owners are watching closely as U.S. tariffs and counter-tariffs are still being poured out.
And shifting focus to China now. China's Baidu has finally joined the AI race, and it has launched not one but two new AI models as it tries to compete in the fast-moving AI race. One of its models, Ernie X1, is designed for advanced reasoning and is set to match the performance of rival DeepSeek R1, but at half the cost. The other, Ernie 4.5, promises stronger multimodal capabilities, which means it can process video, images and audio with improved understanding, logic as well as memory. Now, Baidu also claims that its AI has high emotional intelligence, making it better at interpreting internet memes and satire. Despite being an early player in China's AI market, Baidu has struggled to gain traction for its ChatGPT-style chatbot from domestic startups like DeepSeek. And finally, a SpaceX capsule has successfully delivered 4 astronauts to the International Space Station as part of a NASA crew swap mission. This marks a crucial step in bringing back astronauts Butch Wilmer and Sunita Williams, who have been stranded in space for a period of 9 long months. The Crew 10 mission docked at the ISS about 29 hours after launching from Florida in what was otherwise a routine crew rotation. Remember, Wilmer and Williams were left behind due to issues with Boeing's Starliner capsule, which had to return to Earth empty. Their long-awaited return has now become a priority under US President Donald Trump's administration. Well, that's all we have for you on this edition of Morning Brief at 9. News continues right here on News 9, so don't go anywhere. Thanks for watching.
Crime will never go out of the society.
Crime is a part there.
We do know people who have shot people. We do know people who are criminals. They are real people. They are good, bad, ugly, all